Hi everybody. Okay, this is the first video that will continue our Chapter 5 lecture material. Uh, Recall that when we last met, we talked about slide 25, which was the rest of the intolerable acts. Remember that I'm going to ask you to list all 4 of those intolerable acts on the test, so it's important you have those. But tonight we're moving in with fresh content for the colonial response to British actions. Um, First, we have to start with the First Continental Congress meeting. That was on September 5th, 1774. It was created on the recommendation of a meeting that took place in Williamsburg, Virginia, at a tavern hall. It was a Raleigh Tavern, actually. And it was recommended to be a joint meeting to be held of all the representatives from all the various colonies. And the topic, as you can well imagine, would be all of the revenue acts and the intolerable acts in Massachusetts, etc. The meeting took place ultimately, the meeting of the First Continental Congress was held in Carpenter's Hall, Philadelphia. There were about 56 delegates gathered. Every colony was initially represented except Georgia. Georgia did not send a representative. The group had to select someone to preside over events and preside over the activities, and that ended up being Representative Peyton Randolph of Virginia. So he was elected to serve as the group's, quote, president. Every time a group like this would meet, whether it be a Congress or something, they chose a position known as the president to just preside over the events and handle things like rules of conduct, rules of order, things like that. Now, this group, we well know historically that the Continental Congress was the group that was in charge of the Patriot effort, but that's not this group. This is the First Continental Congress. These are folks who had no intention of actually proclaiming independence from England. Instead, they just wanted to arrive at a common way that they could respond to all the British revenue events and again, the most recent activities taking place in Massachusetts colony. Well, the group was productive. They did generate a piece of information called the Suffolk Resolves. The Suffolk Resolves, which in essence were a series of denouncements about the coercive acts, again, also called the intolerable acts, but they found them to be unconstitutional under existing British law. As such, the colonists were advised to arm themselves, but there was a stipulation that this was not an inclination to commence any type of war with the Majesty's troops. In other words, the Royal British troops. So there was no idea that this was going to be any type of deliberate act of aggression. This was simply advising the colonists to keep their weapons handy in case things got out of hand, all right? It also called for general economic sanctions against England via more boycotts of British goods, which we've already talked about, the non-importation acts and non-importation efforts, etc. So the group adopted the Suffolk Resolves by the Continental Congress as a group on September 17th, 1774, and they called it the Declaration and Resolves document. Now, this was their own personal naming of the Suffolk Resolves. Again, the Suffolk Resolves really presided from a previous sentiment, okay, of towns across Massachusetts. And so the Continental Congress said, yes, we like the Suffolk Resolves. We're going to actually title it the Declaration and Resolves document for the Continental Congress. Now, the British authorities, both in the colonies and in England, you can well imagine, didn't like this. They were pretty outraged. They thought that these upstart British colonists are going too far and they shouldn't be allowed to gather as some group like they're some official group. Because certainly the King and Parliament didn't observe the Continental Congress as being a legal or valid entity. This was just on the initiative of the colonists themselves. All right. So we move on to slide 27, the trouble in Massachusetts. Okay. That is where the polarization or the intensification of conflict between Whigs, who were considered kind of the rebels involved, the Patriot rebels, and the Tories, who were considered loyalists to the crown. These are British citizens who believe that Parliament and the King are the ones who make the decisions, and even if they don't like it, they're going to fall in line. So through the colonies, and I think I mentioned this before, in the colonies, it's not like everyone was on one side or the other. Only about a third of the colonists during the American Revolution were staunch rebels or patriots. Only about a third were staunch loyalists. That left about a third or 33% of the population that really just didn't really care about either side. They just wanted the conflict to be over. So just understand that with this recent uproar of activity in Massachusetts, it incensed the population to generally fall into a couple of categories, okay? So on March 30th, 1774, we have the active session of the Massachusetts General Court, which again is their legislature. It was dissolved, or rather dismissed, by the civilian governor who was still in power, Thomas Hutchinson. He dissolved the assembly and said, okay, we're done here. There's no need for you to have any more activities. We're ending the assembly's activities, and they sent everybody home. Well, by April 2nd, General Thomas Gage, who again is a British general, who was appointed by the British government to take military control as the governor of Massachusetts, he takes control, all right? And what's interesting was Gage was no foreigner to the colonies. He was already the acting commander-in-chief of British forces in North America, and actually had been since 1772. So he was well versed in what was going on in the colonies. He, of course, arrived, replaced Hutchinson as governor, and then, of course, the Provincial Congress was formed. Now, the Provincial Congress is really those folks who were already in the General Court who were just dismissed by the governor. And Samuel Adams was chief among these individuals. And he went down the street to a local tavern house or coffee house and said, okay, guys, we're going to meet on our own. We're going to hold our own assembly, and we're going to call ourselves the Provincial Congress. And this is in defiance of the British government, all right? So this Provincial Congress in October of 1774 forms an entity called the Committee of Safety. And this is formed by John Hancock, who's a prominent member of the Provincial Congress, and he wants to stockpile weapons and supplies among the colonies, just in the event that hostilities with British forces might accidentally occur. He sensed the tension, and he didn't want people to be not prepared. So they formed this Committee of Safety to oversight the collection of arms and munitions and supplies. And then, of course, there's the categorization of a certain number of colonial militia. These are citizen soldiers, you know, reservists, guardsmen, who are already organized in each colony and even throughout Massachusetts colony. And so the Committee of Safety calls these people Minutemen. They are to be ready to mobilize against British forces just in case there's some hostility. Not hoping for hostility, but saying, hey, we better be prepared, and being prepared is better than not being prepared. So these Minutemen will be available at a minute or a moment's notice to mobilize and come to the aid of whatever was needed. Okay, so that's slides 26 and 27. To keep these videos short, I'm going to stop there. We'll pick up with slide 28 in the next video. Thanks so much for your attention. I hope these are helpful to you. I hope you're getting the information you need. And so on to the next video.